This is Don Jeffries. You guys may be familiar with me listening to I Protest every Friday. This is a brand new show. This is our first broadcast of the Don and Ella Show. My co-host is going to be Ella, who I've worked with before and very pleased to do so. Every week, we're going to take you on a compelling and thrilling journey featuring American legends, unsung heroes, and esteemed celebrities. We'll showcase incredible stories from fascinating people, get the inside scoop from the most interesting people on the planet.
And now I'm going to introduce you to our acclaimed guest and a person I admire greatly, Miss Sharyl Attkisson. She's an Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist, New York Times best-selling author. Sharyl is a nonpartisan investigative journalist, 5-time Emmy Award winner, and recipient of the Edward R. Murrow Award for investigative reporting. She is the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Smear: How Shady Political Operatives and Fake News Control What You See, What You Think, and How You Vote, and also Stonewalled. She is the host and investigative reporter for the Sunday morning national TV news program, Sinclair's Full Measure with Sharyl Attkisson, which focuses on investigative and accountability reporting. For 30 years, Attkisson was a correspondent and anchor at CBS News, PBS, CNN, and in local news. Attkisson resigned from CBS News on March 10, 2014, after 21 years with the network, which inspired her best-selling book, Stonewalled, One Reporter's Fight for Truth Against the Forces of Obstruction, Intimidation, and Harassment in Obama's Washington. And that was published by Harper later in 2014. And in her book, she covers many highly important experiences and topics, including her allegations that CBS News failed to give sufficient coverage of Barack Obama's controversies, such as the 2012 Benghazi attack. In May 2013, while still employed by CBS, Attkisson alleged that her personal and work computers had been compromised for more than 2 years, even gaining access to her financial information. While at CBS, she received an Emmy Award for Outstanding Investigative Journalism for her reporting on the business of Congress, which included an undercover investigation into fundraising by the Republican freshman. She received 2 other Emmy nominations in 2013 for Benghazi coverage, Dying for Security and Green Energy Going Red. Additionally, Attkisson received a 2013 Daytime Emmy Award as part of the CBS Sunday Morning team's entry for the Outstanding Morning program for her report, Washington Lobbying, K Street Behind Closed Doors. In September 2012, Attkisson received the Emmy for Outstanding Investigative Journalism and the RTNDA Edward R. Murrow Award for Excellence in Investigative Reporting for The Gunwalker, Fast and Furious Story. An Emmy Award in 2009 for exclusive investigations into TRP and the bank bailout. She received an Investigative Emmy Award in 2002 for her series of exclusive reports about mismanagement at the Red Cross. She also received an Emmy nomination for her investigations into Firestone tires in 2001, prescription drug and vaccine dangers in 2003, which the scientific community rejects, but with millions of people supporting, and also for investigating aid to Haiti earthquake victims in 2011 and Follow the Money in 2011. In 2015, she received the Courage in the Face of Power Award, 2019, the Impact Award for Excellence in Nonpartisan Courageous Reporting of Broad Impact. And in her other book, The Smear: How Shady Political Operatives and Fake News Control What You See, What You Think, and How You Vote, Sharyl reveals how politics turned into a take-no-prisoners blood sport. The book pulls back the curtain on the shady world of opposition research and reveals that the dirty tricks those in power use to influence your opinions. Attkisson is one of the few journalists to have flown in a B-52 on a combat mission over Kosovo and in the F-15 fighter jet combat air patrol flight. She is a 5th-degree black belt master in Taekwondo. She is a graduate of the University of Florida School of Journalism and Communications. This is only a fraction of her deserving awards, and more importantly, the corruption she brought to light. She is my true hero, and she's the hero of so many out there. And to view the complete list of her accomplishments and highly important news stories, please visit her website, SharylAttkisson.com. So thank you, Sharyl. Thanks so much for agreeing to this interview.
Well, thank you. May I make one small revision to the introduction, if you don't mind?
Please do.
When you said, and this is probably from Wikipedia, which should be taken with a grain of salt as always, that the bulk of the community rejects the vaccine autism link. That's, I think actually what you said was the scientific community, as if all of science rejects this link. And that's not true. There is a great deal of peer-reviewed published science and research linking vaccines and autism, as well as government experts, including the top immunologist from CDC, who acknowledged that there may be a link, and the top's one-time expert government witness in court, who's pro-vaccine but acknowledged that vaccines do trigger autism in some cases, and claims the government covered that up once he told them what the science showed.
What about the National Institute of Health? Are they on board with it? Are they more open to this revision on the effects of this?
Well, it's more of a looking at knowing how to ask the question and looking at the details. For example, a lot of people will say the Institutes of Medicine ruled out such a link years ago, but if you read the paper, they did no such thing. They simply gave some very qualified findings to a study that they massaged a lot before it was released, but remained quite open on a lot of these ideas, as did the study author that was quoted, and yet decided to make some recommendations not to go down that area of research any further with government funding anyway. So it's probably way too much to get into in a podcast, because that's its whole down the rabbit hole kind of subject, but it's one that I've been fascinated with ever since I was first assigned to cover it, watching the propaganda campaigns and the misinformation for so many years now. It's really fascinating.
But I hear the vaccinations, the topics of this kind of come to the top again because of the COVID-19. I'm just getting emails constantly, barrage of emails, discussing that. So I know that's kind of a new concern. What topics would you like to discuss?
Well, we can talk about that, or coronavirus, or I guess the topic of my new book, Slanted, which I hope people will pre-order, is so timely now because it has to do with what I see the widespread manipulation of our information by third parties and corporate interests, whether we mean the news or social media or the internet. I think this is one of the biggest dangers we face today. And likewise, I discussed the devolution of, I guess I call it the death of the news as we once knew it, with special emphasis and chapters on what's happened to CNN, where I used to work, and what's happened to the once mighty New York Times in terms of journalism.
Yeah, just the COVID-19 epidemic, or pandemic, I should say, has really hit the forefront. I mean, I can't even turn on the news without hearing about this. And now, and of course, the vaccine, most people are, or I don't know what the percentage is in America, but people are really reluctant to even consider taking it, which in a way is a problem within itself.
Well, what I think is interesting about that, the propaganda campaign likes to portray for years that it's a rogue and strange viewpoint to be circumspect about vaccination, as if all vaccines are safe and effective and necessary. But what I learned, and after being assigned to cover the story, is like all medicine, there's a huge variety. Some vaccines have been pulled from the market because they were dangerous. Some are safe for some people, but CDC says others shouldn't get it because of risk with their particular factors of brain damage or death. So we all know with medicine and vaccines alike, it depends on the person. It depends on the vaccine, how necessary and effective it is. So there are different calculations for people to make. With coronavirus, though, with so many people expressing concern about a quickly developed vaccine, I think you suddenly see not such a rogue and fringe body of opinions out there who have concerns about vaccination, because you see how many there really are amid this campaign over years to try to make it look like there's not many people who wonder about safety issues. But I think it's wise to wonder, but I would say one thing about the coronavirus vaccine. I believe, if I had to guess, that this will be one of the most careful processes they can do as fast as they're trying to do it, because none of these companies wants to be pegged for having put out a vaccine that would quickly show if it has immediate safety issues, and then also hurt faith in the entire vaccine system. So I think they're going to be as sure as they can be and as careful as they can be to make this vaccine be one that is as safe as possible, not skipping over red flags or anything like that. Now, the downfall, or one drawback, I guess you would say, we don't know how effective it's going to be in the long term because it can't be tested for 1, 2, 5, 6 years. So it'll be sort of a guess when it comes out in terms of how long it works for, what the long-term adverse event profile is, and so on.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the other important topics right now that that interest you? Maybe you've already covered them, but there's just so much information out there. And sometimes things get buried. When you have something like the COVID-19, it's drawing attention away from other topics that maybe we should know about.
I think, this is obviously something I hyper-focus on because I report on it, but the control of the media is really one of the most important stories going on in our time. Yeah. The fact that the news media has now not just been co-opted by third parties and corporate interests, it shapes almost everything you see on the national landscape. When you see a story on TV or read about it in a national publication, it's by and large because somebody wanted that story placed there. Even if you're seeing opposing views on the story, we're talking about it because somebody wants us to talk about that, which means a lot of other news is slipping through the cracks, things that are really important to people who are tired of kind of tuning in to find out what's going on in the world, to be greeted by a round robin of dueling propagandists from political parties that aren't really telling us anything about the world.
Mm-hmm. Donald?
Yeah, Sharyl, one of those stories that slipped through the cracks, at least as far as mainstream media, in my view, was, I think, one of the biggest stories of the year that just went largely unreported, except for, in fact, when I was posting on social media about it, I had to go to some, off-the-wall website I'd never heard of that reported it, and that was Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I'm sure you're familiar with because he's talking about a lot of the same things you are, when he went to Berlin recently, with hundreds of thousands of people in Germany were protesting the lockdown, and he spoke where President John F. Kennedy gave one of his most famous speeches as president, and the media ignored it. The mainstream media. I mean, how is that what you're talking about? Because me, that is manipulation of the news because it's by leaving it out.
Right. That's a perfect example. That's something that organically, if the news weren't subject to copying each other and doing what the propagandists want us to talk about on a given day, we would look at that from a neutral standpoint and say, wherever you stand on various issues, that's newsworthy, that's interesting. And the fact that I didn't see it reported on I didn't see videos of it on the news. Now, I didn't sample all the news, so I can't say nobody did it, but it certainly didn't have a prominent, that was easy to find. So yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's the danger of people manipulating the topics that we talk about and the fallacy of thinking, well, I've heard both sides because I've listened to Fox and CNN. The fallacy is we're still talking about what they want us to talk about. We're still hyper-focused on, let's say, the Trump scandal of the day at the expense of the real news that people want to find out about that's happening in the world, and a lot of it involving health and safety and medicine. There's a lot of big stories just about that matter to everybody, about the things we do with ourselves and our bodies and the food we eat that gets virtually no coverage.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, now how do you feel about, you probably I'm sure have been, the fact that you're not with CBS or CNN any longer, you've been basically marginalized in a way, although you've certainly gone on to have great impact with people like us that admire you. But as far as, do you feel like you're kind of pigeonholed, especially talking about vaccines and autism, because that has been thrown into the conspiratorial world, where you're automatically, you're one of those kooks that thinks that. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I think, is unfortunately been marginalized like that as well. Do you feel, that's my world. I'm comfortable in it because I'm talking about controversial issues all the time, and I believe in total freedom of speech. But what do you think of that, and the fact that basically, if you're going to talk openly about this subject, you have to go on podcasts or things like that, because you're not going to be able to talk about it without being mocked on Fox or Fox News or CNN or MSNBC?
Well, I don't know that I mind being mocked or that I've been mocked to my face about things like that. But I reach we feed to 43 million households on my independent TV program, Full Measure, where I've had this story. We've discussed this story. That's by far the better reach than I ever had at CNN, PBS, or CBS. And I write for The Hill and Real Clear Politics and a lot of, widely circulated organizations. And I've written on these topics. So I'm not sure, people want you to believe it's that way. And you'll certainly hear a lot of pushback and conspiracy talk if someone discusses vaccine safety in a rational way. But I think get outside of that internet world and the news media, and most people are a lot more rational when it comes to these things and not automatically, believing the propaganda that they hear. They kind of recognize when there's a campaign going on about a topic or something that, powerful interest wants you to think a certain way about. So I don't feel as though it's been a huge factor. Or
no, well, I guess I shouldn't have. I mean, obviously you have and MSNBC shows like that are overrated anyhow, because Rachel Maddow may get 250,000 viewers or something on a given night, whereas some of the podcasts I go on that have 500,000 subscribers, so they have a bigger base there. But so you certainly have a huge audience there. But as far as
is it easy to cut through all of that propaganda that does blanket social media and the quasi-news media and all of the outlets in the system that work with media matters like Slate and Vox and all of those, Mother Jones? It's not easy, but I guess that's the hard but fun part about the kind of reporting I do. And I'm not the only one that does that kind. Glenn Greenwald of The Intercept and others do that sort of off-narrative reporting, and we're willing to take the flack from the colleagues who either don't know better or have been bought and paid for or ideologically aligned with these powerful interests and their donors. And I guess I'm just used to it because now it's been going on several decades where I've battened back those sorts of attacks, and I'm pretty comfortable in that space.
Mm-hmm. You have to say, I'm going to go back just a little bit and circle back to your comment about the public. I would say the public has become wiser to the propaganda. And I have to credit Trump for that, because he really draws attention to the slanted news. And it's something I've noticed maybe in the past 10 years. What's your opinion on that?
I agree. I mean, I think there's reason for hope. There's, people are in different slices of what I would call the information consuming audience. There are some people that believe all of the stuff that they see on the outlets, on the things like Media Matters and company puts out, and they don't question. And then there's people that question some things but don't dig very deeply. Maybe they look at Snopes and they don't understand that Snopes itself is compromised in many instances. So they're good about looking for something but not looking far enough. And then there's a segment of people, and I think it's growing, that understands a lot of information is being manipulated. A lot of what the news media puts out is out of context or incorrect or censored entirely. And I think that small but influential group is growing, and I think Trump's election reflects that, because if you look at in 2016, he was far outspent in terms of money, which usually dictates who's going to win. He got all the bad press, on the mainstream media. So the media was on the side of Hillary Clinton by and large, and he still won. And how did that happen? It happened because despite the control of this information that we're talking about, there was a people that either didn't listen or did their own research where they came to a different conclusion.
Mm-hmm. And in your interview, I actually saw that interview in the springtime. You interviewed Trump. What was the highlight or the takeaway in that interview? I did hear him say that you gave a magnificent interview, which is coming from him, what he feels about the press.
Well, I've interviewed him 5 or 6 times, and I would say he has a tremendous grasp on a lot of detailed information, and the way he presents his side may not always sound like he's that organized when he's talking about something, but it's pretty amazing that he can be briefed on very arcane topics and be able to address them with the specificity and understanding he seems to be able to address them with. And I don't see an Obama or a Bush I don't feel the same way when I listen to them. Maybe Clinton in some instances, meaning Bill Clinton, but he has an amazing grasp on a lot of different topics. He's very upbeat, so you can convince yourself when you're not with him in person that if you watch the media that he's angry and fat and out of shape and depressed and all the things they say. But all of the times I met him, he's just, chipper and upbeat and happy and energetic. So that's a difference. And then one little bit of insight I had, you know how he talks in this sort of meandering way? He'll start to talk about something. He'll leave that point with a bunch of parentheticals. You know what I'm talking about? And then he'll come back to it maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he does that on purpose. And I wasn't sure. I watch him at home and I think, how did he even remember where he started this sentence? He did come back to it, but I don't know how. I mean, that takes some skill. And at the end, our interview went on a little bit to air the whole thing without editing. And he knew that. And as we were cleaning up and stuff, he said, don't cut a bunch of stuff out. And I said, well, I'm going to have to edit. And he said, well, and he mentioned some network that had done an interview with him recently. They cut too much out. He goes, I talk about other things when I'm giving my answer, but I do that on purpose. And I really think he does. It was the first time that I thought, wow, that's sort of a tactic or a strategy, how he answers a question, veers off and makes a bunch of other points, and then comes back to the main point at hand.
Mm-hmm. We just have a few minutes left, but I have a quick question, hopefully just a quick answer. Who would you like to interview right now and why? And then, of course, I want to get to your books because they're so important. I want people to know where to purchase them and how to get information in regards to your show.
Well, if I had more time to think about it, I might come up with somebody else. But right now I'm trying to get an interview with Biden because I have interviewed President Trump. I hope to have one more before the election. And I'm talking with the Biden folks, but I certainly would like to have the same opportunity to interview him in a challenging but non-confrontational way and ask about a lot of the issues that people want to know about. So my answer is Biden.
And how can people just maybe give some plugs? Because again, I think your books are so important. Your information is so vital.
Well, thank you. I guess I try to cross-post most of my work at SharylAttkisson.com. Even if you misspell my name, that website ought to come up. So wherever I'm writing for, it'll usually appear there. FullMeasure.news, where you can find how to watch my Sunday show with off-narrative reporting. But most importantly, right now, I think, the book Slanted with the subtitle, How the News Media Taught Us to Love Censorship and Hate Journalism, that talks about all of these things we're talking about now, but the whys and who's pulling the strings, not just the fact that it's happening. If people will pre-order that anywhere, I think it'd be fun to have that book be my third book in a row that the New York Times is forced to put on the New York Times bestseller list, especially when it includes a chapter marking the devolution of the New York Times.
Donald, do you have any final questions?
Well, no, I wish we had more time because I want to touch a little bit more on internet censorship, because that plays into the fake news thing and everything. And certainly we talked about COVID. I'm sure you're aware that YouTube has been censoring any videos that go against the WHO or CDC. I think online censorship is because that's the only place you can find this other than your show. Elsewhere in the mainstream media, it's very hard to find these alternative perspectives.
I see it the same way you do, which is why they're clamping down on so much information. And there's chapters on that in Slanted, specifically with the coronavirus, how Google announced a partnership with the World Health Organization on the front end to direct searches only to certain sites like World Health Organization sites, only to come to find out WHO and others had completely wrong information. So here we were, this is the peril, our searches directed to certain things as consuming information consumers, information that turned out to be incorrect, while we could have on our own perhaps thought about and found different information that was off the narrative but proved true if we were not being told, this was fake news and we shouldn't read it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're living in very interesting times. What's the old expression that maybe be cursed to live in interesting times? So I think we're all cursed at that point, aren't we? But
it feels a lot like 1984. Worth reading the book again.
Oh, absolutely. I throw those Orwell quotes out all the time. It's just so. Thanks so much for being with us, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you and making time for us. Ella, did you want to say anything else?
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your work, and everybody needs to check out our work because it's one of the most pure forms of journalism out there.